Good morning, Canada. Today I'll be ranking every film that Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross have ever done a score for. Now, this is based on how good the films are overall, though I'll of course discuss my thoughts on the scores in depth, and generally, I think the better the score, the better the film was, with a few exceptions. Not only do I get to talk about two of my favorite composers, but I get to rank some of the best from David Fincher, Luca Guadagnino, as well as a few other notable directors these two have worked with, along with the gigs that look like they kind of just did them for money. They often work on really great films, so ranking them will be tough. Better start with the bad film first. The merit I will give this film is not really based on the score. You really can't hear a lot of it in a lot of the parts of this film. At the end, you hear a bit more, but how on earth do you get an hour of music from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross and make it so low in the mix you can hear it for like 5 minutes of the film? The main thing I give this film credit for is succeeding at creating a feeling of something being off. This is a film that keeps itself vulnerable to so many nitpicks to make the plot work. From an entertainment level, which is where the film lives, it does keep you glued to the screen. The deaths are goofy, which do add to the sense of something being off. The attempt to create a character arc for Sandra Bullock's character is poor. There are too many characters. Most are unremarkable. John Malkovich is the character that probably works the best, but he dies. We don't really stay with anyone long enough or in interesting enough circumstances for us to care about them. A film that delivers on the premise and fails at mostly everything else. Patriots Day is a film about the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013. You know that immediately because the music is very much implying that the people we are seeing are either going to be injured or die or get into some kind of trouble. They try to do a very documentary-esque presentation with title cards posted under locations and names. Boston Marathon bombing in 2013. You know that immediately because the music is very much implying that the people we are seeing are either going to be injured or die or get into some kind of trouble. They try to do a very documentary-esque presentation with title cards posted under locations and names. It constantly reminds us of what time it is. Kind of like another film in this movie, but just used very differently. The score is a really simple synth and piano that seems really sad. The music in the tense scenes does work very well, and I was on the edge of my seat. The film does dramatically pick up once we get past the bombing and move on to the manhunt. That is easily the most captivating part of the movie. A problem I had with this film that other people did was that it takes a crash approach where the characters are all mostly separate, only connected by the bombing. But then they create this one character who wasn't a real person to connect it all, and it's played by Mark Wahlberg. Not only is there not enough time to develop his character, but this film seems conflicted in what it's really trying to cover. Is the point of this film the tense chase and work that these police officers are doing? Are they the real life heroes who tried to stop these men? Or are they the survivors and people affected by the bombing? For all these interesting people that we get, it does feel like a fake cop was easily the least interesting person to center as our protagonist. The wife character, who becomes more important towards the end, barely gets any development. Again, it implies the tragedy much before we see it, so I guess it functions like Fruitvale Station does, where we try to get their humanity of these people before we see some of their tragic ends because of these men. We also do get the perspective of the brothers, which, again, I don't understand the point of that, when they really don't honestly try to give them any perspective or nuance. They make them say a couple of interesting comments about their criticisms of the United States, but that part is not nearly as developed, and by the time you get to the end, it very much feels like they were trying to implement a certain point of view on this film, one that very much promotes Americans in the United States. There's not a lot of sympathy for these brothers or anything that's happened in the Middle East, really. So for that, I kind of have to dismiss this film as being important. I don't understand who this film is for. It feels like it's for cops. There's many things you can say about cops, specifically how they're portrayed in this film. but unfortunately the film doesn't really give much nuance to that. Empire of Light is the definition of a nice movie, but nothing here is the best of anyone who is working on this film. This is mid Mendes, mid Roger Deakins, mid Olivia Colman, and mid Reznor and Ross. That's still better than a lot of other mids, but the screenplay itself is so light I cannot get excited about any aspect of this film. The best I can say about it is, yeah, it was alright. Truly forgettable. The most forgettable film Reznor and Ross have ever worked on. When I asked my dad, who saw this film at TIFF 2 years ago, if he remembered anything about the film, he could not name a single scene. They do get to play some nice music during the film's emotional moments, but again, it's certainly not their best score. Michael Ward is well cast. It covers some interesting topics with respect and proper dramatic weight. However, it is never connected or presented in a way that engaged me more than any other dramatic moment like these would. It does not really have a unique voice beyond the music in these scenes, and the music itself is mostly similar and not as good as other Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross scores. Sam Mendes should probably stop writing his own screenplays. I mean, this is definitely a fun film, but certainly one of the weakest on this list. Mostly because it never really takes itself seriously. The score itself, while fun, is one of the least memorable. The film is good, the animation is unique, the voice acting is fun, and they're able to bring in Gen Z jargon without it being uniquely cringe. The story is entertaining and well written overall. Certainly nothing groundbreaking, but this did end up being my 1000th film I logged on Letterboxd, so it kind of has to have a special place in my heart. Despite the fact I put this low, I am a Mank defender. This film looks gorgeous. First of all, David Fincher is doing something new with how he recreates the old film look digitally, and there are a lot of impressive effects that are blended well into the sets. It pulled off Babylon scale with almost a quarter of the budget. The dialogue is witty in a lot of this. The screenplay was deserving of an Oscar nomination. Gary Oldman is great here. The filmmaking has all of the Fincherisms I like, including the smooth camera pans. Again, more of a tame score from Reznor and Ross. They produce a very classical Hollywood-style score, which they can do very good at, but it's not their signature style. They still create more memorable and distinct sounds than I remember from other classical Hollywood films. The story itself is an interesting take on this figure who was the writer Citizen Kane, and not only was a writer, but also struggled to be honest as a political critic who constantly questions the foundation Republicans have stood on for years. This is a good movie, though not one I'm biting to revisit. I covered this film in my top 20 films of 2024 video, but I'll quickly say this is definitely not one of the best Reznor and Ross scores. It does have some memorable themes, and the music does help add to the visually stunning atmosphere. However, the music itself stands out less, and the atmosphere is what you focus on. For me, great films often have such strong visual sequences that the music can almost take over because the visuals do all the other explaining you need. Here, the music does get a chance to do that once or twice, but in some of the more important moments, they opt to use a Nirvana song, and other times they use a theme that is just not nearly as good as a lot of the other work Reznor and Ross have done. Great performance in this film, and it's a unique, respectable piece from one of our great directors, but certainly not one of the strongest. In theory, this film should be higher. I love romances with an interesting twist. I love Taylor Russell, and I think Timothée Chalamet is easily one of our most talented actors. The score here is quite good. It's memorable, but also a lot more subtle than a lot of the other scores from Reznor and Ross. The last shot is incredible and memorable. The supporting actors are all appropriately creepy and well cast. Luca does a great job with this film, but the screenplay does wander a bit much. A lot of this film before the end blends into itself. Honestly, a lot more like Challengers than you think, because it's a romance about people who won't admit they are pretty fucked up, and obsessed with the singular pastime. Some of you probably think this belongs lower or even at the bottom of this list. I think you're wrong. Maybe I just watched it at the right moment, but mid-90s felt quite personal. Jonah Hill does a really good job building up empathy for his young characters, and you care about what happens to them at the end of the film, even as the film doesn't really give you a lot of answers. Some scenes do have some directional flaws, and Lucas Hedges is a bit questionable in this role. Jonah Hill crafts a unique story where he sees what happens to a young kid who searches for social validation and runs into sex and drugs while doing so. It's a heartfelt project that captures the loss of innocence and a particular moment in Los Angeles during the mid-90s. This film is probably the least rewatchable film here. Fincher, more than any other director, is getting into a gross and uncomfortable place with this film. No one is cool here, everyone kind of sucks, even those you kind of feel for and have bad things happen to them kind of violate their principles later. This film also proves that David Fincher is incredibly sexist, and for good reason. The men in his movies in particular suck so much. Daniel Craig may be a cool character in this film, but Rooney Mara is a lot more distinct and just the better character, and yet she's barely the protagonist. The script itself, with worse direction, could be a 6 out of 10, but David Fincher does elevate it. The film looks incredible. Rooney Mara proves in this film, and continues to, that she has range that many could only dream of. They tell us about her character really quickly, and then the film drags a bit at points story-wise, but the editing and the way it's captured help move it along better than most films. Here, Reznor and Ross take a back seat again. The more prominent use of music comes with the use of Orinoco flow. The soundtrack itself is not as memorable as their others, and again, is more about the atmosphere, and this is an atmosphere that is well made, but not very inviting, even in a sadistic way. It's just kind of ugly. The film itself has aged really well. I've not seen it since its release, but I recall it being a pretty solid Pixar comedy. The comedy itself carries most of the film during the middle, all while building up to some nice self-reflective drama. I'd like to think if this was released in theaters, people would respect this a lot more, and this would have been the comeback that Pixar needed critically and financially that it kind of got with Inside Out 2. It's a more simple reflection on the meaning of life, a theme that something like The Tree of Life gets into in more depth. The score itself does get to shine, and in the pandemic year, it certainly deserved that Oscar. Pete Docter just always brings a lot of heart to his films, despite their flaws. He, unlike some directors, is willing to embrace some story issues to bring kids a meaningful film. I sure hope Disney's efforts to make this a classic pay off, because it's the best of the 2020s for Pixar, and who knows if anything will rival that. I felt sick before rewatching this film, and I came out of the film feeling even sicker. One of the best films that fits Fincher's themes of nihilism about human beings perfectly, where anyone's attempt to do the right thing or for any character to be a good person is a completely undercut. Again, every person sucks. They make bad and uncomfortable jokes. They have no idea who they are as people without each other. It's really the most fucked up fairy tale romance ever made. Really interesting to see how the media shapes the narrative about people, something that is still way too prevalent in the social media age. Great casting all around, but of course Rosamund Pike in the lead is perfection. The score sets the rhythm and the tone of this film brilliantly, where the music is the first cue to tell you how this film will be. From there, the score only gets more bizarre, like the situation Nick Dunn finds himself in. It has all the normal interesting Fincherisms, smooth camera pans, stark presentation, just one of his defining films. Okay, this is probably my most controversial take on this list. Look, first of all, the score is very good. Maybe not the most memorable score, but as effective as their best scores. I think this is the film that works the best, having watched David Fincher's other films. Here he begins to subvert his normal technical traits. The camera shakes in purposeful moments, and there's also an odd humor and humanity that is often absent in stuff like The Social Network and Gone Girl. I could make a whole essay on this film, but the main takeaways I get is that it can kind of be interpreted either as a really interesting meta commentary on Fincher's own work, or as a commentary on how the working class struggles and how they end up protecting and worshiping the rich no matter what they do to them. These themes make the film instantly interesting, and of course, Fincher can deliver these themes through an expertly crafted, entertaining hitman thriller. Maybe this is the pick that some people will think should be even lower on my list. I've said that before, but I know some people really don't like this film. And don't get me wrong, the writing and the substance of this film does leave something to be desired. There's a better script to this film, and honestly, probably a better cut of this film. It's a bit long, but the pure energy and atmosphere created by this film, where the filmmaker basically has the balls to create a music video, teenage Gen Z, messy energy into a more grounded and tragic story, is admirable. The ensemble here does an amazing job. Kelvin Harrison Jr., I feel, solidified himself as a star, and so does Taylor Russell, both of whom have to bring us into their stories in a shorter amount of time than the average movie protagonist gets. Great and memorable use of music, interesting looking cinematography. This film just blows me away every time I see it. The score here is probably the most subtle that Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross have ever done. It's really subtle, but it works as sound design, and it makes some moments truly, really uncomfortable or stressful. The score clearly has some staying power because they use some of the tracks from the score in The Bear. So basically, without this masterpiece, you wouldn't get The Bear, one of the best shows on television. So if you like The Bear, you have to like this movie. As soon as the music in this film kicks in, you feel like you are ascending. One of the best uses of a score ever, where it's loud, club-like music is almost overpowering, but it adds to every scene where it's used. Even ones where it threatens to interfere with the dialogue, it's just so good. The score is super memorable. I've been listening to it all year since this film came out. And to use such unconventional music and have it work is something to be admired. Luca here is also delivering some of his most fun work, where he plays and experiments with the camera in a way that delivers energy and the sweaty experience of playing a sport. Amazing cast, and all of them give arguably one of their, if not their best performance. Certainly Zendaya may be one of the best castings for a role in a long time. Great film. A future classic. This is the film I tell people is one of my favorites of all time. A lot of that is due to the score. It does everything Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross have been great at in all these other film scores, but delivers all of that. There are memorable and emotional themes, subtle but effective music in some scenes, blaring music that delivers the frat and college energy portrayed in the film. They managed to make something as simple as a boat race, which, let's be honest, is pretty boring, seem epic with music. The screenplay itself, I think, may be one of the best conventional narrative scripts ever. Insanely classic lines, and the themes of fragile masculinity, social isolation, and the dangers of the internet have only become more prominent today, especially if you've seen what Mark Zuckerberg's been doing in the news lately. It does all of this while captivating you with what, for me, is a heartbreaking story about how wealth and power could just split two good friends apart. It's insanely rewatchable and detailed. I always feel I discover something new on every rewatch. It's definitely a modern masterpiece.